Hello, everybody. I'm so excited tonight. Welcome to Disrupt Your Now with me, your host, Lisa Kipps-Brown, and my co-host, Rachel Garrett Mercer. This is a split off from my Thursday night show, Adaptable Entrepreneurs. I'm so excited I forgot the name. Our special guest tonight is Dr. Hoby Wedler, and Hoby is the founder of Hoby Wedler Consulting. But Hoby, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can tell a bit about your background, and we're going to get this thing rolling.
Oh, man, thank you so much, Lisa and Rachel. It's so good to be on your show tonight. I just feel humbled and honored. You guys are two great people. We've gotten a chance to chat for a few minutes here before jumping on, and you guys are awesome. You guys are fantastic people with such great big ideas. I love it.
Thank you.
So I was born totally blind in Northern California, and that was an interesting thing for my parents. They kind of said, "Oh, what do we do with a blind kid? You know, how do we do this?" But the thing about my parents is they're adaptable, and they work super hard to figure things out and get them done in the best way possible. My mom often tells a story of calling a dear friend of hers on the, just to tell her that, hey, your son, my son was born blind. The friends, she said, this is what really changed their attitude. The friend, her husband answered and said, oh, no, my mom's best friend from college could overhear her husband talking to them saying, oh no, oh, that's just terrible. And my mom's best friend Barb got on the phone and said, oh, what happened? You got to tell me this. What happened? And my mom said, oh, he was born blind. And Barb's response is, oh God, that's nothing. I thought he was dead. So
it really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Right. Like being blind is a hell of a lot better than being dead, I'll tell you.
That's for sure. Yeah.
And my parents' attitude kind of shifted after that. And they kind of said, wow, we need to have high expectations. We need to do the best we can. They had a wonderful group from a very, very early age. I think it was about a week old when they started working with the Blind Babies Foundation.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, and what they instilled was just this confidence that your son is just anyone else, as any baby. He just happens to be blind. And to flash forward several years, throughout my sighted brother and my upbringing, my brother's 2 years older than me. He's my one other sibling. My parents treated both of us the same way. The whole idea was you take responsibility for your life so that when things happen that are great, you get the credit for them. And when things don't happen so well, you take the blame, and I think that's a really good message. And they also held extraordinarily high expectations of us and allowed us to have extraordinarily high expectations of them. And finally, the thing they taught us is just to respect, they did that through respect. It wasn't like you need to respect everyone and we're just going to tell you what to do. It's like, it's a two-way street here. We're all going to respect each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. I was very happy and fortunate that they had the attitude that they did. And I've just been kind of a nerd all my life and loving kind of figuring out how things fit together and how they work. So, I was the kid who would turn the water on in the kitchen faucet and say, now, how the heck is there pressurized water coming into my house? Like, who's doing this? Who's out there doing this? And that led to a call with the city and a tour of the city water department.
Gosh, that is
hilarious. And we figured out that water is being pressurized throughout the city and pumped into the house. Who knew? And you turn on the vacuum cleaner.
Even gave a darn.
Well, this all led me to my, when you turn on the vacuum cleaner and the motor roars to life and the brushes start turning and the suction's created. How the heck does this work? Because I knew that electrons weren't just flying into this thing. I knew they had to go somewhere. It's like my dad did a lot of electrical work. So I talked to him about all this stuff and figured out that no, electrons are just coming in one wire and going out the other into the ground. And all we're paying for to get this motor to come to life is the force, the electromotive force that we push electrons with. So, when I learned at a very young age that when you pay for power, sorry, this is just my nerd coming out. I have to say this. When you pay for power, you're not actually paying for, the electrons that are coming to you. you're pained by the pressure or voltage that forces those electrons along. This spawned a love of science. And then I got to high school and fell in love with chemistry. And when it came time for my junior year, I decided that I needed to apply to take honors chemistry. And the instructor, I had her for physical science. So she said, yeah, fine, go ahead. I don't think she knew that I would pass the test to get into honors chemistry, but she let me take it and I passed. So she kind of had to let me in. And it's like, well, how the heck are we going to do this? So we figured out a game plan. I worked with an assistant who had taken the class the year before me, and everything went fine. There's one thing that happened sort of quite often is that she would say things like, oh, now you guys should study it. To the whole class, y'all ought to study chemistry because it really is the science of everything. It's how the world fits together. It's the air we breathe. It's the water we drink, all this stuff. And then I would go to her and say, hey, I really want to study chemistry because I want to teach it eventually. And she'd say, I don't know if it's really practical. It's such a visual science.
Wow.
And I knew I had to break that down. I knew that wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Finally figured out my way of doing it. Second semester, I went to her and I said, nobody can see atoms. Therefore, chemistry is not visual, it's cerebral. And from that point on, she became a true ally.
Awesome. So, you were the only one that got it, right?
I guess so. I don't know. And then, she became an ally and supported me going off to undergraduate school at the University of California, Davis. And I studied chemistry there. And, well, what can I say? I was a nerd and knew that I wanted to teach. I always had the heart of a teacher. I love explaining things to people that maybe they didn't previously understand or didn't know they wanted to know or didn't know they liked. And just ultimately getting people to feel great about what they do know.
Uh-huh.
And my goal with my love for chemistry was I wanted to be a college instructor and walk into a lecture hall just full of freshmen, hundreds of freshman students on an 8 a.m. on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. after a weekend of partying and get some of them to say, most of them are probably taking chemistry, not because they want to, but because they have to for some other major. Yeah. I wanted to get some of those people inspired to study chemistry. And to do that, to teach at the college level, you got to get a graduate degree. So I did that. And while in graduate school, I ended up getting the pleasure of having the honor of teaching a few chemistry classes. And I realized that students don't like to speak chemistry in this day and age. They like to look at pretty pictures of things happening. And I was spending most of my time making pretty pictures with my assistant and not enough time actually teaching chemistry. So I realized maybe this isn't necessarily the correct field for me. But I did end up graduating with my PhD in chemistry in 2016. And to all your dear listeners, what I have to say is, if it takes getting a PhD in something to realize that's not what you want for your ultimate career, you've gone too far. Or you're
I love it, Hoby.
Or you're a Gemini like me who can't make decisions worth beans, It's one of these things.
But that's awesome. But you have to do it really before you know if you like it. And that's why I always tell people, just try things because you can't know until you can't know. And conversely to you, I've always been like, oh my gosh, I would never be a teacher. I've always said, you know what? I would end up in prison because I would have to kill somebody. It would either be.
I think you'd be a great teacher, Lisa.
Well, now the thing is, now I realize I love teaching. What I don't like is teaching in the school environment. I mean, a lot of what I do is actually teaching my clients and explaining things to them, things they think are way above their head. And I explain them to them in a way that they can understand using analogies and everything. And it's really funny, though, because my older sister is a Spanish teacher. And she's always like, oh, you ought to be a teacher. I'm like, no, I could never be a regular teacher, imprisoned in that room all day.
Yeah.
But it is funny how both of us took our nerdy, geeky, whatever. Mine was math and numbers and the web, and yours was chemistry. But it's funny how you and I both have come around. And we've kind of met in the middle with branding and strategy, totally opposite sides of the country. And we've kind of done the same thing.
We've done similar things. And really, it's entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And, I swear that I really think we're either born entrepreneurs or we're not. And I know that I was an entrepreneur from a young age. Yep. And I realized, what entrepreneurism is, in my opinion, is it's not about the money. So many people hear the word entrepreneur and they think, oh, these people are in it for the money. I'm not in it for the money. I hope I can pay my bills at the end of the day. No, what I mean there, and I'm joking partially, but what I mean there is that entrepreneurship is about problem solving.
Yeah.
It's really about seeing a problem, a real problem, identifying and half the battle is identifying the problem, and then figuring out how to solve it. And, if we can make a few coins along the way while we solve the problem, that's great for all of us. But it's really about finding these problems that people have and then figuring out a solution and helping to build that solution ideally into some business opportunity.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, I used to think that I wasn't creative at all, Hoby, because I thought of creativity as painting and art.
Oh.
I mean, I was in band in high school, and my father was a musician, but I was not. I mean, I was in band, but I wouldn't call myself a musician. So I never thought that I was creative. And then when I started my first business when my husband retired from the Navy, that was the first time that I realized that I was creative, but creative through thinking and ideas.
You're one of the most creative people I know.
I was going to say the same thing.
Well, thank you. But see, it's so funny because my aunt was an artist and my father was a musician and all this. So I always thought of creativity as the arts. I didn't realize that just thinking is an art.
Absolutely.
100%.
Well, I think about like liberal arts degrees or things like, where we're teaching those kinds of things. My degree is in theater. And really, I tell people that the degree is a piece of paper, but the critical thinking skills and the creative thoughts and those kinds of relationships that you build, those are the kinds of things that propel you into any career, into any field. So if you have that, like you're saying, you're kind of born an entrepreneur or you have that creative way of thinking, I think those are the key takeaways from any kind of line of thought like that. For sure.
You know what's funny, Rachel, is I was actually going to ask you if you were a theater major.
Oh my gosh!
I can tell by the way that your voice projects without yelling, but it's just a very projecting voice. I can tell your voice was trained for the stage.
Without yelling like me, Rachel.
It's interesting how things stick with you over time. The little skills that you build up, whether it's theater or speaking or public speaking or those kinds of things. It's like the innate skills and then the skills you build, just those things like as you grow and as you build in whatever career it is. But I take that as a high compliment. Thank you.
Oh, 100%.
Well, for the people viewing who are not really familiar with me, my father was blind. He was not born blind. He started losing his sight when he was 8, but he was totally blind by the time he's probably 15 or 16. And without getting into a lot of detail about, his background and everything, I can just say that he was the type person like Hoby that never saw his blindness as a limitation. He even did things like mow the grass. People are like, how did he mow the grass? Well, he did it barefoot. Because that way he could tell which grass had been mowed and which grass hadn't. By feeling it on his feet, he had a lathe. He did all kinds of woodworking, never cut himself on it, but a sighted man who came over and Daddy let him use his lathe. That man cut the end of his finger off.
Oh.
He was so worried that Daddy was going to cut himself, And so I honestly feel like a lot of my creative thinking and my just refusal to recognize boundaries is because of being raised by him.
Lisa, it's such an interesting thing because people I've found in my life over the years that people who have been very close to blind people, whether they're a relative or a close friend of a relative or just a close friend in general, have this comfort about blindness. It's not a problem. Like when you and I got on our first call together, it was totally natural, and people communicate with me fairly naturally. But when you and I started talking, I could tell that my blindness was not who defined me in your mind. And what's funny about this is that my mom's friend, who was totally fine with my blindness when I was born, her father's best friend was a blind man and totally blind. So she grew up with it. And she knew that it's just not that big of a deal.
That's right. Yeah. I was talking with somebody the other day. There were several, even though we grew up in a small rural community, there were several blind people here. My father was not from here, but he moved here for a job when he first got out of school. he was a piano technician and he ended up owning that business. But there was another guy that grew up here who was a lawyer, and Daddy always wanted to be one, but couldn't afford to go to school. So he spent our entire childhood, putting us through the third degree like a lawyer would have. And then there was another man who was a butcher, Hoby.
Really?
Yes, a blind butcher. And we would go every once in a while, Daddy would buy a cow. And of course, and you'd go to the butcher shop and there was this man. And so in our mind, there was really nothing that they couldn't do. We didn't think of, and I think I told you this when we talked the other day, the first time we really talked. My best friend in high school had been coming to our house for about 2 months. I had not said my father's blind, just like Rachel, you don't say my father has blue eyes or whatever color eyes are. I can't remember. But, I never said my father is blind, but she'd been coming there for like 2 months, and we were at school and somebody said something about Daddy being blind. She goes, he's not blind. I was like, oh yeah, he is. But because he was sighted first and then lost his vision and then went to the school for deaf and blind, I mean, really, unless you were really, really watching him, and especially she would see him in his house. So
right. In his element.
Sure.
Steps and this, that, and the other. If she'd been out seeing him somewhere else, she would have realized it. But people were like, oh my God, I can't believe you didn't tell her. And I'm like, well, why would I have? Seriously.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's such an interesting thing. So I think we're all entrepreneurs in our own right. And, it's just, it's a lot of fun to think about problem solving. And what's funny is that entrepreneurship is a lot like being a blind person in a sighted world. You have to figure out ways to do things. And if you think about it as problem solving, it's just that, when I find hacks or ways to make things more accessible to me, that really is nothing short of solving a problem. And, when I would in college, when I would meet with my professors, I'd always I'd try to go in at least before the course started or immediately, when the first week of school. And I'd talk to my instructors and say, this is a journey that we're on. And you don't need to be afraid of how this is going to go. You don't need to be afraid of what's going to happen. We're going to ask each other questions, and we're going to figure out a style that works for all of us. We're going to solve the thing that you might think of as an issue of having a blind person in your class, and we're going to make it a lot of fun. And then I assimilate this back, and actually, Lisa, I thought this might come up about your father, so I thought of telling this story tonight, and that is, I assimilate that all back to working with my clients. It's the same thing. It's not about who someone is or whether they're blind or sighted or anything like that. It's just about sitting down, and it's a total parallel because we sit down and we solve their problems and we get them to think about things in a maybe simplified way that they don't necessarily think of them in. And it's just so much fun to do. So and the other thing about this whole line of thinking is that, when you're blind, you have to do the things that you're good at, but you can't hesitate to ask for help with the things that maybe you're not so good at. And I would just say very much that's the same. The most successful entrepreneurs get help in the areas that they don't, that they're not as good. We need to not be afraid to ask for help.
That is so true, Hoby. That's a great point that you brought up. And I'll have to say that's one of the things that I'm the worst at. I'm
not great at it either. So do as I say, not as I do.
I'm terrible at asking for help, and I'm terrible at delegating. And I know why, but still, it's something that I really have to work on every day. And it's very interesting that you brought up that parallel. That is so interesting to me because about a year or so ago, I wrote a blog post about how being a creative thinker is like wearing 3D glasses and everybody else is wearing regular ones. That you such a rich, you see them in your head in such a rich way and everybody else is seeing them in a flat way. But basically what you're saying is the same thing.
Totally. No, it's the same thing. We see the world differently. And I'm not saying it's better or worse. We just problem solve, you know? Yeah.
Well, no, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go.
I was just going to say what stuck out when you were talking too is you would approach teachers and talk about how you would work together. That to me really stood out, because you're then inviting them into this dialogue and into this conversation of how will we work together. And I can just see that happening, in what I do every day, which is help entrepreneurs and small business owners and things like that do what they need to do and help them ask those questions. But I love that you said that, because I feel like that's what we try to do, as people, as entrepreneurs, is invite people into these conversations and do that in a way that helps them not necessarily feel comfortable, but to be open to new things and new opportunities and new ways of thinking. Does that make sense to you guys?
No, I love that way of thinking. It's, so many people, I'm going to make another analogy. So many people I work with in the entrepreneurial space and in the disability space like to complain, oh, this isn't right. We might take legal action if you're not careful. My response to everything is educate, don't litigate.
Yeah.
There are times and places for any, of course there are times and places for, really taking serious action, but 99% of the time, just talking to people and getting them to understand your perspective. We can have disagreements all we want, but if we just teach people how we think and get them comfortable with that, so many more doors open. And that, to me, is the definition of collaboration. So I totally resonate with that, Rachel.
Yeah, it's just letting that guard down. I tell clients that all the time. It's about, if I'm not vulnerable with you, how do I expect you to be vulnerable back with me? And then 100%. How does that relationship work no matter what industry you're in? That's something that I'm constantly working with people, and
I love it.
If it's adding a fun fact about yourself, or a fact, you're blind, I have type 1 diabetes, whatever the things are about us, that it helps just bring those guards down. I don't know. I think that's a beautiful way to collaborate with people, no matter what you're doing. I think that's part of, it's part of entrepreneurship in my mind, is just being open and vulnerable to opportunities, but also to people. I think that's important.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah. You would never be able to tell that she's a writer, could you? And I always tell people, if you don't know the questions to ask, you can't. You don't ask the right questions, you can't get the right answers.
That's the truth.
You probably don't even know the right questions to ask, and that's kind of what you were teaching your teachers, Hoby.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every step of the way, it's like, how can we make this work for each other? It's like we're collaborators, not adversaries. That's my favorite, one of my favorite phrases.
Great.
Yeah. Tell us, okay, so you were getting your PhD when you realized that teaching the traditional teaching was probably not the route that you would take. Tell us the first entrepreneurial thing that you did, like outside of teaching.
Absolutely. And this actually, ironically, has a lot to do with teaching as well, just in a different way.
Yeah.
While in graduate school, actually right around the time, ironically, when I started graduate school, I was approached by Francis Ford Coppola's team. And for those who don't know, Francis Ford Coppola has made a couple of movies and is somewhat well known in the film industry, but he actually loves wine and had a passion for wine long before he had a passion for film. So his goal with film was to fund his passion for wine and making wine for other people.
That's so funny. I never knew that about him. I mean, I knew he had the winery, but.
Right. Yeah. So in 1974, he bought a property in north of Napa. And then in 2004, he acquired a property here in Sonoma County. And now he has several. Well, I got a call in late 2011 from his team saying, listen, Francis wants to work with you to co-innovate a truly blindfolded wine experience that he offers his guests that we can, use as a hospitality experience. And his criteria is that he wanted it to be led by a blind person. And the other thing that I didn't say at the beginning is I've always had growing up in wine country of California, I've always had a passion for understanding, something hyper local around me.
Yeah.
It's just really important to me. It's like the water from the tap, right? But in this case, grapes are growing all around, in vineyards and virtually in my backyard. And then are being made into wine and packaged up and sold all over the world as a premium item. So I've always had sort of a passion and curiosity about winemaking and wine flavor. And I even took a few winemaking classes. I went to the University of California, Davis, which is has a large wine school. So I took, even as an undergraduate, just out of interest, some winemaking and wine appreciation classes. And I realized throughout that time, as I honed in on my palate, that I've been training my palate, what I can smell and taste in things for my whole life. It's just what I'm passionate about, whether it's something I smell and can identify or something I taste and can identify. So I guess what I would call that is in general, I'd call that sensory literacy. And I really want to get back to that. But for this story, suffice it to say that I felt like I was, maybe fit for the job to work with Coppola to build this experience. And we worked, he was happy with what we put together. And by the way, when Francis Ford Coppola's team calls you and asks you to do something, you say yes, and then you hang up and you freak out about what you just agreed to.
Let me see if I'm busy.
So during the course of that time, we built it as what was going to be just a hospitality experience at the winery. And because the sales team, the Francis Ford Coppola sales team, didn't have a huge education component, they soon were selling this, we were doing this experience around the country to support the sales team. And because I'm a computational chemist, my laptop was my laboratory, and my advisor is an amazing person. So he let me travel with them a lot and host these programs around the country. And then, the Coppola team is amazing. The CEO is a guy by the name of Corey Beck, who I just really admire and look up to. And, Corey said, take this experience and run with it and just see what you can do with it. So I brought it to all sorts of food and drink markets throughout the world and different industries. But not even outside of food and drink, even as a way when people have disagreements or maybe aren't talking on the same page, put on a blindfold and have a different type of conversation where we're not distracted by the way someone is looking at us, right? We've even used it to teach empathy to high school students, actually doing high stakes activities like you said, your dad had a lathe. We taught students how to turn wood on an electric lathe where the blind student was turning, assisted by a non-blindfolded partner. So it's amazing what we can do with sensing the world.
That is so cool, Hoby.
Thank you.
And the thing is, you can, whether it's a car or food, if you're not using your sight, you experience everything else differently. So whether you're in product development or if you're just a team trying to work together better,
100%.
It's going to make you rely on all these other senses differently.
It will. And that led me to something that I defined in my career called sensory literacy. And I actually gave a TEDx talk all about sensory literacy about 4 years ago. And we've made kind of a business out of sensory literacy, which is really allowing ourselves to use all 5 senses to experience the world. And I believe any sensory literate person can take information in from all their senses, what something feels like when you touch it, what something smells like, what something sounds like, tastes like, you name it, or looks like, process that information and make logical deductions from each of the senses. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because we're all visually literate, right? If I said, okay, Rachel, I'm going to show you a picture of a red fence, and you've seen enough fences that you know that you're looking at something that divides 2 bodies of land, presumably, right?
Right.
But if I said this is red, you would just know that, and you would know it by looking at it. And ever since you were a child, both of you were young children, and someone holds something up and it's like, hey, what color is this? That's red. That's red. You're going to identify it that way.
Yeah.
And because we learn these things at a young age. But how often is it that we smell something or feel something with our hand or smell something with our nose? We say, what does this feel like? Can I describe it using words as meaningful and as quick and unambiguous as red? And oftentimes it's hard to do. It's harder to make these connections and to make these comparisons. But as someone who's never had my eyesight and someone who's always been super in tune with my senses, I really care about thinking things through and understanding how my other sensory inputs can give me information. Sighted folks use their eyesight to obtain about 85 to 90% of the information from their surroundings. So I've found that when we take that sense away temporarily, we're able to come up with some really insightful and exciting opportunities for just viewing the world differently and understanding things quite differently. It really creates, I think it creates opportunity in all of our minds doing whatever we do. And I think if we can really learn how to be literate in our senses, we become more aware of the world around us. And if we want to talk about what true inclusivity means, well, I think inclusivity comes as a direct byproduct of awareness.
Wow. Yes, definitely. I'm so glad that you brought up, well, I knew you would anyway, about the senses, but I was thinking about you yesterday because I read an article about the people losing their sense of smell, with COVID.
With COVID, yeah.
But about how everybody takes their sense of smell for granted, and even experts, they're like, oh, it's just smell, but it was about how there's so many other things that are dependent on smell. But as you said, we have colors that have names, we have shapes and that have names, but when you have smells, there's no like defined, we know what a square is, we know what a rectangle is, we know what a circle is, we know red, green, yellow, but we don't have defined words for smells. It was such an interesting article. I need to send you a link to it.
Was it the New York Times article?
Yes. So you've already read it? I
read it along with you. Yeah. And it's, it's interesting to me, and what I want to encourage your listeners to do more frequently than they do is to really think about what that sense of smell is delivering to your mind.
Yeah.
And, not only, oh yeah, okay, I can walk out and smell when someone's barbecuing, or I can walk into a room and smell that there's a chicken roasting, or, anything like this. Try to understand your surroundings with your sense of smell and what's happening around you using that sense, because we're over-reliant on our eyesight. We really, really are in so many ways. And if we allow those other senses, not only smell, but also sound and touch and taste, for that matter, which also seems to be going away during, with a lot of people who test positive for the coronavirus, just not necessarily taking those things for granted and loving them. When you walk out on a spring morning and you smell, or a spring evening and you smell jasmine blooming, stop and think about it. See if you can find the jasmine bush.
Right. Yep.
It's so interesting because some of this is, I've had a very basic introduction to using senses through mindfulness. So things to help overcome a panic attack or something like that. I've been taught to, fill a box with items that you can smell or touch, or those are kind of the key things that you're often told. And so it's very interesting, and I think really cool what you're saying about taking the time to appreciate it, so that when you need to draw on those other senses, they're already kind of available to you in whatever situation that you're in. I think that's amazing.
Oh, thank you. No, it's really interesting. Rachel, I've got a question right back for you.
Sure.
When you go outside and, dusk, probably after dusk right now, what does your farm in the country smell like? What does it remind you of?
Yeah. So funny enough, there is this very distinct mud. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And I'm working on a way to describe it because I try to do this to my mom. I always say, the dog's feet smell like this mud. And it's nothing like, it's not like a Georgia clay, or it's not like the sand at the beach, but there's this kind of musty, like farm, there's the farm smell. There's that manure that you smell.
I love that.
And then there's that mix of this like musty earth mixed with grass when it's like springtime. So those are the three things that I'm always trying to figure out better ways to describe them. But this mud is the biggest thing that there's some Tennessee mud that is out there.
You need to package some up and send it to Hoby.
Yes, help me describe it. Yes.
Hoby, I feel
That'd
like
be amazing.
I spend my whole life practicing for conversations like this because, Daddy would have us come in the room. He'd be like, don't turn the light on. I don't have a light. You don't need one. But when I get up at night to go to the bathroom or anything, I never turn the light on. I always operate by, I'm just like, it's just something I do.
Second nature.
My husband will be like, oh, turn the light. I'm like, no, I don't want it. Because I love that feeling of being able to navigate without sight and being able to, I can pick up things by knowing where they are,
I love that.
So I want to challenge people out there. If you haven't done that, make an effort to do that on a regular basis, because it really makes you so much more aware of your other senses. And I have to say, I have a problem with my left eye. It's epiretinal membrane. So it's basically like a huge thumbprint in the middle of my eye, and it's not getting any better. And, eventually I may lose the sight in my left eye. And I mean, of course I wouldn't be thrilled with that, but I kind of feel like at least I'll have some practice. And you know what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Well, I think you hone other skills too, right? You're honing your ability to be empathetic. You're honing your ability to do all these other things, and your senses are kind of a part of that. Hoby, I think you touched on that earlier. It's kind of a gateway into just getting in tune with yourself in so many different ways. So Lisa, I think that's great. You're even
do it, Rachel. When you get up at night, try to do it without.
It's so funny. I'm the person that leaves all the lights on in the house. You're challenging me because I'm definitely the one that, my husband will come back and turn them all off, and I'm turning them all on.
It is very interesting though, because I'll even know like where to reach to get like my allergy medicine, for example, or my inhaler or whatever. I know the general direction as long as I know my orientation in the room, but you also learn to sense things like walls and things, even if you can't.
You can hear them.
Right, Hoby? You
can hear them.
Yeah, because the sounds are different in the way that they bounce off them. And you would think, well, there are no sounds at night when you get up, but there really are.
Oh, there are. Yeah, well, you make noise, your feet hit the floor. And that's how myself, along with a lot of other blind people, like to navigate, is by just listening to things. And we hear echoes bounce off of things. And I know it sounds a little bit daredevilish, but echolocation is a real thing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And go ahead.
One of the other things that I wanted to tell, just sort of touch on with sensory and this whole talk of touch and sound. One of my other passions is creativity in branding and in building, in designing. So I actually partnered up with an amazing gentleman out of Adelaide, Australia, back in 2019, who has a creative company down there and runs a studio of about 15 people, and they do graphic design. But I actually came in and showed them how I design things non-visually, and they are so amazing with the visuals that when we pair that knowledge with non-visual design, we really get some cool things. So how does, we do a lot of work in food and beverage. So how does this bag sound when you open it? Yeah. How difficult is it to open? All these things. So I represent Tucker Creative, which is his company here in the United States right now. So I'm pretty much the sole representative of it. And, again, food and beverage branding, but it's so much fun to think about how can we marry the visual with the non-visual? And this is what is so interesting for me. I love talking to people. I love talking to anyone, but I really jive sometimes with visual people who, artists, things like this. And the things that we can come up with just back and forth are really, really quite fun. And Jody's a good example of that. But just think about how things feel. Or if you're using a bottle of shampoo, like one of those cheap hotel bottles of shampoo, that's just totally smooth and your hand's slippery and it just slides right out of your hand onto the floor. That can all be fixed with a little sensory design tweak just to make the bottle a little more holdable. It's things like this that we don't think about.
Yeah, you're talking about making everything experiential. Yes. Companies like to talk about experiential now, but they use it in isolation, like about events or certain products. But what you're talking about is making everything experiential.
Exactly. If we can, everything from the doorknob on your bedroom door to the Amazon package that you have to open every day, it seems these days, everything's an experience.
Yeah.
And we can define that experience.
Rachel's dad, Ron, posted when we were talking about smells, and she was talking about the smell of mud, and he said he found that so true with foreign travel, completely new smells that are disorienting.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. Yeah.
He's done those. What are those races he does, Rachel?
Oh, there is the tuk-tuks. It's like the rickshaw challenge, Dad. Is that right? It's like the rickshaw. Oh,
yeah, the tuk-tuk races.
And they go around India, and it's the craziest thing I've ever heard of, but it's fascinating to hear his stories.
Sounds amazing.
It is so cool.
I can see Hoby doing that. Yes. All.
Oh, and you'll have to talk to him about it. He won one.
I'd love to.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to. That's so wonderful. And it gives an opportunity for international travel too.
Yeah. Hoby, I want you to tell us, I was reading that article in Wine Spectator about the thing that you did with Dave Matthews Winery and Music. I thought it was fascinating. The part about the part about the people, it was the same wine and they didn't realize it.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, it was such a trip.
I love that.
That was such an experience. So I'll tell a little backstory. It's a great little story how this happened. So I'm kind of on adjunct faculty for the Culinary Institute of America's Napa campus here in California called Copia. And every year they do an event called the Summit for Beverage Professionals. It used to be called the Sommelier Summit, basically anyone who's involved in beverage now. And they planned as the sort of activity, the post-conference activity for the first night, they planned for that to be a silent disco where people are judging wine based on what kind of music they're hearing. And they know I do a lot of weird stuff with wine and senses and all that. And they said, "Oh, sure, you can come up with something, right?" I said, "Well, gosh, let me think about it." They wanted to think about wine and music coming together. So I said, "Okay, let's see what we can put together here. Let's see what we can think of." So I said, I'm never going to not do something just because it seems like a shot in the dark, no pun intended, or like it's going to be unachievable. I'm always going to try. And the worst that can happen is people won't respond or say no.
Right.
So I know that Dave Matthews has, he's a musician, a well-known musician, but he also has a great taste in wine and has a couple of wineries, one in Virginia that he owns now, and then a larger wine brand out here in California called Dreaming Tree Wines. So I said, you know what? I know that Dave Matthews is big into wine and music. I'm going to reach out to the winemaker for Dreaming Tree. It's a big brand under Constellation Brands, which is a huge wine company's portfolio. 45 minutes later, I got an email back from Sean McKenzie, who's the Dreaming Tree winemaker. And he said, "I'm all ears. We need to have a call about this."
All ears.
Wow.
So we get on the phone and we start talking about this. He wanted to learn a little more about what I do. And I of course, wanted to learn a little more about him and the collaboration with Dave and the whole thing. And he said, I think we can really do something here. So I went up to the winery and met with him. We tasted through the wines. And then he sent me home with samples of each of the wines. And I went and I perused the whole Dave Matthews songbook, which is not a hard thing for me because I listen to his music anyway.
Sure.
And what we put together were 5 different wines, actually 4 different wines, and 2 of them were the same iteration of the same wine, and 5 unique songs. And for the first 4, we blindfolded everybody and we talked about the wine and how it smelled and put people's mind in a place of being with the wine. And then we would play the song and just, listen to the song and then come back and talk about how the music made us feel. And kind of Sean would talk about winemaking. Another gentleman named Ali Bazari presented with us, who's a food expert and a molecular gastronomist, an excellent one at that. Would talk about kind of the way the wine makes our mouth feel. And then I'd talk about the pairing. And for one of the wines, it was the Dreaming Tree Rosé. And we paired that wine, for any of your listeners who know Dave off of his most recent album, Come Tomorrow, we paired it the first time with a song called Here On Out, and the second time with a song called When I'm Weary. And they're both very calming songs with really deep, cool messages to them. And what was so amazing is everybody thought the rosé was something different when they heard When I'm Weary versus Here On Out. And they were right next to each other in the pairing. And it was just mind-boggling, even to me, that song, that difference in music, made people describe the rosé totally differently and even think it was a completely different wine.
Yeah, the sound was affecting their taste.
Of course.
That is so amazing. I thought that was the coolest thing when I read that in that article.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we had a really good time with it. It was a fun project. Actually, we did that on March 1st of 2020. So that was like my last hurrah before the pandemic hit.
Oh, wow.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're going to tease some people now. That's why we're talking about doing some of these things virtually, y'all.
Absolutely.
So hold your horses, because Hoby and I have some news coming soon. It's going to be fun, right, Hoby?
It's going to be huge. It's going to be fun, and we're all going to taste some yummy treats and hopefully treat our ears to something great too.
Yeah.
To that end, Lisa, I'm actually coming out right now in the next 1 to 2 months with a food line. I didn't get to. I don't think I told you about that, but here's the problem. It was that I do a lot of home cooking. My partner and I do a lot of home cooking. And I've used all sorts of rubs and spices, and they've all been okay, but I haven't found anything that I think is truly excellent. So I made my own recipes about a couple of years ago now, and said, hey, wait a minute. I'm getting the pleasure and luxury of eating these things that I love every day. I think the rest of the world should have this opportunity as well. So we found a spice purveyor who we're working with. We're building all these blends with them. And we're launching with two different SKUs. And the name of the line is going to be Hoby's, HOBY''S. So that'll be coming up too if your listeners want to check that out.
I knew that you were working on that, but I didn't know when it's coming out, and you hadn't told me the name. So when is it going to be coming out?
My target launch date is, and I'm going to say this publicly, and then I'm going to really, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm going to work really hard to achieve it, is April 1st. So I gave myself a little leeway. We're probably going to launch before that. But we're very excited because we just secured our very first investment for it. So that really means the rubber hits the road.
That's awesome.
Huge. That's exciting.
So much fun.
I was telling my son about it, and he loves to cook. He actually used to work at a catering place, and he was a chef there. But so he was so excited. He can't wait until it comes out.
And I was going to say, I'm not the best cook, but my husband's going to be really excited because he's always playing with different spices and things like that. So I'll have to snag some and see what he thinks. And
absolutely.
Are you going to be in stores or just available online initially?
Online to start, but definitely in the not too distant future, we're planning to launch in stores as well. So we're really excited about it.
That's awesome. And I knew
there's something so much fun, and this is my third or fourth new business. So it's like there's something so much fun and also so terrifying in the most exciting way around a business. Yeah. Around a new business.
Any launch for sure.
Yeah. And it's like you're so excited, but there's that fear of like rejection, because you're really putting yourself out there with any new business. Yeah. And so it's exciting, but it is fearful. I have my next book coming out, which, by the way, y'all, Hoby is going to be in, called Disrupt Your Now, The Successful Entrepreneur's Guide to Disrupting Your Business and Life. So hello, Hoby is like the expert. I'm telling you how to disrupt stuff. But yeah, whether it's a business or a product or a book, it's very personal. And you really are putting yourself out on the line, and people don't realize how much entrepreneurs go through personally just to chase their dreams.
It's a lot.
Well, what advice would you have for someone who may be either thinking about starting a business, or maybe they already own their business, but they're just feeling dissatisfied? Do you have like any advice that you would give them as far as chasing their dreams or thinking differently?
So I wrote an article recently that I'm giving away for free for anyone who wants to join my email community. I'd love to have, each and every one of you, and you'll see the ability to join very easily just by going to my website, which is hobywedler.com. And you'll get a free download link if you join. And that's just going to be a news community, and just want to keep people posted on what's happening and show some successes and failures and what worked and what didn't work, and just raw honesty, Yeah. So what I think, and this article is called 5 Mindsets to Succeed at any Challenge and Raise Expectations. So the most important thing, I think, is that, if we're going to dream big and have high expectations, we have to be willing to challenge ourselves, right? And when we challenge ourselves, that's scary because it's vulnerable. It's like a launch of a book or a new business. It's exactly what we were just talking about. And it's all about finding that way of being able to feel at least a little more comfortable with any challenge you might push your way, right? So we outline, and I, as a blind guy living in a sighted world, trust me, I've had to face challenges, and I don't succeed always at the first try, but it's about knowing how to get right back up and figure it out when you maybe do fail. So the mindsets are really simple, and I unpack each and every one of these and describe my graduate journey and a little bit of my entrepreneurial journey through each one. But the first one is, believe in yourself. We need to totally believe that we can do something before we get going. The minute we start having self-doubt, saying, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this, that's when things become super difficult. If we don't have that notion of, yes, I can do this, and yes, I am capable of this, then we automatically force ourselves mentally not to be capable of it, of whatever we're trying to solve. The second one is, don't compare yourself to others. And I think that's probably the most important mindset of them all. The minute we start to compare ourselves to others and say, God, how did she get $5 million for her business and I can't even get $1? That sort of thing. We never are winning if we compare ourselves to people who we think are better than us, or if we compare ourselves to people we think are not doing well as us, because that makes us cocky, right?
Yeah.
No one wants that. And the third, and the one that I just love, is start small. So if you want to do something like write a book, or get a graduate degree or start a business, you got to do it in bite-sized pieces. If you take the whole enchilada on at one time, you're just going to fall on your face, right?
Yeah.
The fourth one is and I think these are good guides for anyone jumping out there and starting a business and needing to dream big.
Yeah.
Being consistent, and if we're going to be consistent with something, we have to do something that we like, right? So if you say, I'm going to get in shape by running 4 times a week, and you hate running, you're probably not going to be consistent with your running regimen. Right?
So true.
Gotta like it. Gotta like it. And the fifth one is just the very straightforward one of don't be afraid to fail. It's always okay to, and I've learned that there's an art to failing, which is preparing for the worst and saying, what is the worst that could happen in business? It's usually losing money, and it's all sorts of things. I don't want to unpack what the worst thing is in each case necessarily, but just don't be afraid to fail and get right back up on your feet and go at it again. Keep on trying. So those are my 5 mindsets. And again, I'd love to give a copy to each and every listener.
Yeah, y'all, please do go to hobywedler.com, HOBYWE. I can't talk. HOBYWEDLER.com, and sign up for his email and get that article. It's going to be so interesting. And Hoby, the thing about failing, don't be afraid to fail. When we learn from what we fail, we're failing forward. We're helping ourselves. When we don't fail, we can't learn anything.
Yes.
We stay stuck in the same place. And I think that your points that you just said, they're great for entrepreneurs, but they're great for anybody, whether somebody's trying to lose weight or start a new, fitness regime, or anything at all that you want to do, gardening, anything. Those 5 things that you mentioned are all great points that are applicable.
Thank you, Lisa. It means a lot. I think it's about challenging ourselves and trying to succeed. And I've learned more about business than I ever would have by buying an expensive business degree by trying and failing. I'll tell you that.
That's for sure. Fail forward, right?
Right.
Rachel, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask Hoby before we go?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have anything to ask. I'm going to go download that right now.
Yeah. So many things to ask. So go to hobywedler.com, and Rachel, give them your website address.
Yeah, sure. I want your web address too, Rachel. I want to know more about can you just tell us a bit about what you do, Rachel?
Sure. So I started my business about 6 months ago, 2020. I shifted gears completely from what I was doing, and I own and run my own copy editing and copywriting business. I help creatives and business owners really hone in on what their messaging is, and I help them present that to the world in the most refined and polished way possible with their, I call them their you-isms. So pulling things from them, helping them craft that story, and then sharing that with people that just infuses who they are so that everybody gets to know them through their copy. That's really what I do.
You just got yourself a client, and he's right here.
I love it. Honestly, I love it.
Your background in theater helps you tell that story, Rachel.
I just love it. I love it so much. Just telling people's stories and helping other people tell their stories is one of the biggest things that I love it. I keep saying that it's one of the biggest things that just brings me joy in this life. And I've been doing it for the past 6 months, and it has been the most challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done. But Hoby, those 5 points you just said, I need to literally print them off and put them like in front of my wall right here so I can look at those things every day and just remind myself when it gets crazy and hard on this entrepreneurial journey, to just keep pushing and going.
And I'm not saying that those points make it easy for me. I still struggle all the time. I think we all struggle.
Yeah. Because we always will. And that's the other thing I wanted to say, that, the imposter syndrome is related to one of the things that you said. And while we need to fight against that, we also need to know that we're always going to have that every once in a while. Every once in a while, no matter how accomplished you get, there's always going to be somebody that you look at and go, oh, they're better than me. And, so just expect that and know that everybody feels like that. I wanted to say also, Hoby, it's so cool that Rachel founded her business because of COVID and her health issues. And so she has taken a negative and turned it into a positive. And I love that about your business, Rachel.
Rachel, I've never said the name right.
What's your business called? And tell me how I can find it, because I need you.
Sir, it's Mercer Editorial Services. And that's just mercereditorialservices.com. That's me on pretty much any platform, Instagram, Facebook. My website.
How do we spell Mercer?
MERCER.
Perfect.
That's me. Yes. Mercer Editorial Services. I'm here for all of that. I'd love to work with you, Hoby. I know we've only talked for an hour, and I can already just tell that this would just be a fun partnership.
Well, all of our brains together, and then Ryan, who's the one in the audience. Oh my gosh. Watch out, world.
Ryan, I can't wait to meet you. If you're here listening, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to sit down and chat and get to know you better too. And I just want to say that I'll be starting a podcast here in the next few weeks, and I'd like both of you to be on, as fairly early guests, just to talk about what we're talking about. Are people who have worked hard and gotten somewhere because of their hard dedication and hard work and dedication.
That's great. So, do you have a launch date yet, or?
I am trying for February 18th. And again, Lisa, you're really good at this thing. You get me to commit to dates. And I'm a perfectionist, so I have to do it.
When you say you're going to do it, you have to do it, right? Do you have the name yet? Do you have the name of the podcast yet?
We're working on that one. Working on that one. I've got a few contenders.
But see, that's why I do my show live, Hoby, because for like 3 years I wanted to do a podcast, and I kept putting it off because I'm a perfectionist. So I was like, I don't know what I want it to be about, and yada yada yada. Plus, I just, the thought of the production just made me sick. And so last summer I'm like, oh my God, I'm just going to do it live, because then it's out in the wild. I give up control, and it makes it so much easier for me. And we just talk about whatever we want to talk about, but also we're getting it out right then. So we get to talk about really timely issues and not worry about it being 2 months later that somebody listens to it.
I just love it. I love the live idea. And by the way, Lisa, before we go, I finally took my Colby test. I've got a score for you.
What is it?
I'm 3386.
Oh my God, that's very interesting.
Simplify, is the first number. High quick start, mid range, implementer. I don't know. What are you again? Remind me what you are.
4392.
Whoa, you've got high quick start. 9.
And
Oh,
what's the last one? The one that I'm a 2 and you're a 6. I forgot now what that is.
It's called implementer.
Yeah, so you're better at implementing than I am.
I don't know about that.
The really cool thing is, Rachel, there's no wrong answer. It
There's
basically
no wrong answer.
placing you on this scale so you learn like how your brain and motivate, how you're activated. And so it helps you understand yourself, but it also helps you find good partners to collaborate with. But it's so funny, Hoby, when I read the write-up that came with mine, I was like, oh my God, because the things it said, it was like they literally could have just been describing me.
I know. Well, that was my problem too. It's scary.
It's very
really,
interesting. But I'm really
wild.
glad that Justin Breen told me about that because, and then I was like, once Justin told me, I had to go take it because I knew the next time him, he'd want to know what my score was. So had to go take it. But yeah, so y'all, the Kolbe test, Kolbe, and I'm one of those people, I hate personality tests. This is not a personality test. This is about your cognitive strengths and weaknesses, or not even strengths and weaknesses, the way that you think and the way that your brain is activated. So it's really cool. Rachel, you got to take it.
I need to go take it. That's on my list of things to do.
Brian and I are almost exactly the same. We were on, I don't remember his exactly, but we were only off by like a point.
The reason we get all these crazy ideas, Lisa, and they balloon so quickly is because you're a 9 quick start, I'm an 8 quick start. And it's like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's get it done.
Exactly. Yeah, just do it because other people are going to sit there and talk about it for a year.
It's true.
Brian always says we could do 10 things and fail before somebody else can do one.
I get it. Oh my gosh.
Well, Hoby, I have had so much fun, and I know Rachel has. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Rachel and Lisa, this is such a pleasure. Lisa, it's great to talk to you again. And Rachel, it's so lovely to meet you. I'm definitely gonna reach out to you. Really excited to know you.
I am so excited too. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great.
And everybody out there, Thursday evening, my guest is Roberto Ibitzin. I probably am totally screwing his last name up, but a Swiss-Mexican multi-dimensional designer, industrial designer, everything along the design spectrum. And he has done everything from design electric cars to design houses for bees to make them more likely to be able to pollinate the food that we eat. So just a really cool person. Yeah. And also I want to tell y'all, sorry, I could keep talking forever, but Hoby and I met through Clubhouse. So when you meet people, when you hear people speak that you think are interesting, reach out to them on Instagram or somewhere and just tell them why you think they're interesting. That's exactly how we met, and we just hit it off. So watch the show Thursday, and also if you like this show, this episode, go to my website and you can see all the past shows. LisaKippsBrown.com, LisaKippsBrown.com. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.